A while back, I made these tags out of kiln-fired clay, and I really liked them, but there was a lot of driving back and forth to the ceramic store for firing and glazing and firing again, and I thought I would like to try to make some at home. So I bought this air dry clay. This is the Premier brand air dry clay, and I found it really easy to work with. You just pull off a section of the clay and knead it a little bit in your hand and soften it and combine it. And then you would roll it out into an even thickness. Mine ended up being about a 1/4 inch thick. I have an old rolling pin that I picked up at an estate sale that I only use for clay. But this clay is really soft. You could also use a cup or even a child's Play-Doh roller. Next, you would need to find a circle or some other shape that you're going to use that's just a little bit bigger than the size that you want your tags to end up. I used a lid that was about an 1/8 inch bigger than the size I wanted the finished tags to be because the clay does shrink a little bit as it dries. Then you just need to cut around your shape to make your tags. I used a clay tool from the ceramic shop, but you could use a utility knife or anything else with a sharp edge. Use your fingers to gently smooth the edges of the clay. It doesn't have to be perfect though, because we will fix the imperfections a little bit later. Then you need to use a straw to poke a hole in the tag so that you can hang it later. This is air dry clay, and you could leave the tags for a few days and let them air out naturally, but I really wanted to speed up the process a little bit, so I baked my clay tags in the oven for a bit. I first put them on a couple of pieces of parchment paper layered on top of a cookie sheet. I put that pan into a cold oven. Then I turned the oven on 200 degrees and baked for 10 minutes. I turned the tags over and baked for 10 more minutes. Mine still needed another 24 hours of air drying before they were completely dry, and they really do need to be completely dry. You will know that they're dry when they don't feel cool, if they're very lightweight, and they don't have any give, like you can touch them with your fingernail and it doesn't leave a mark. I have read that putting air dry clay in the oven to speed the drying can cause cracks. I did not experience this with any of my tags, but if you are going to be using a different brand of clay or you just want to be safe, you might want to try one as a sample. Once the tags are completely dry, use a fine or medium fine grit sanding block or a sheet of sandpaper to gently smooth out the faces until they're fairly flat. I accidentally left a couple of mine with a bit of a raised edge, and it made the next step a little more difficult. So I'd suggest that you sand them pretty flat. Some of my tags were also a little misshapen, so I used the sanding block to smooth the edges to a more circular shape. The next step is to paint the tags with craft paint or chalk paint. I couldn't find a craft paint at home that was the color that I wanted, so I ended up using Dixie Belle chalk paint in the color drop cloth. I painted the front and the back and the sides. If you want your tags to be reusable, then you are going to need to apply a glossy finish. Here's what I found to work best for me. I used spray gloss on the back. You could also use a paintable gloss, and allowed it to dry. Then I put painter's tape over that and cut around the circle. Next, I used a straight pin to poke a hole in the tape through the hanging hole in the tag. Find something you can put the tags on top of in order to pour on the gloss coat. I wrapped a few bottles of craft paint with plastic wrap and set the tags carefully on top. I really wanted a glossy finish so that I could wipe off and reuse these tags, and the only material I found that really worked for this was resin. I used the brand Art Resin, but you could choose another resin if you prefer. Just follow whatever directions are on the resin package of your choice. Mix up a batch of resin and coat the edges and the tops of the tags. I use the spoon that I stirred the resin with to apply it. These tags will not take very much resin, and you can always use this resin for creating art, coasters, or other crafts later. I just use a straw to blow the resin around and to pop any resin bubbles. You may still end up with a few tiny bubbles, but they aren't really that noticeable once it's dry. This is where you will be happy that you sanded the tags very flat. If you leave a lip around the edge, the resin will pool in the center and will not leave as smooth of a surface for you to write on later. After you apply the resin, use the straight pen to go around the underside edges and inside the tag's hanging hole to help wipe off some of the resin drips. You might have to do this a time or two. Allow the resin to dry for 24 hours and then remove the tape from the back. Use a chalk marker to label your tags. Once the writing has dried, you can tie them or wire them to your baskets. The resin will make the chalk marking erasable with any dry cloth. This way you can reorganize to your heart's content later and your DIY tags will be reusable.